I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Marks. Welcome everyone to Arcane Mark Asks Mark Moreland. We have Mark Moreland over here, for the franchise manager for Paizo.
Welcome.
Hi, Mark. Glad to
Hello.
have you on the show.
Thanks.
So before we ask you the usual questions of how you got started playing Pathfinder and at Paizo, can you explain just for a moment for everyone here what a franchise manager does? Because I had an episode early on where I talked a lot about what a developer or a designer did, so we don't explain it every episode. But franchise manager is a very nuanced position.
Yeah. So franchise manager, I primarily deal with the intellectual franchises. So as opposed to working on a specific book or uh, any given rule element, I'm working more on a brand level with our licensees, with folks internally, with our marketing team, to ensure that we have a consistency in both the Pathfinder and Starfinder brands when they're translated to other languages or when they are adapted into comic books or audio dramas or video games or what have you. So it's sort of the creative side of our licensing department. So I work with Eric Mona on some of the long-term strategy of what do we want to be publishing in 2 years? How can we build toward that? What can we do now that will make that easier and make the brand stronger? And then I coordinate with our licensees to ensure that when they make a miniature of, whatever, that it's accurate to the world, it's the right size, and that it helps further the franchises.
Awesome. All right, well, so that's what a franchise manager is. So let's get started with our typical questions. So, Mark, how did you get started playing Pathfinder?
How did I get started playing?
Yes, we asked that first because it usually happens chronologically before working in Paizo. Although some people not the case, but
yeah. So I got started playing Pathfinder when the beta was announced or the alpha was announced. I had been part of a long-term group while I was living in New York City. And among the people in that group, coincidentally, was Greg Tito, who's now the director of marketing, of communications, something. He works at WotC now. So that's sort of a fun little coincidence that we were gaming buddies before we were competitors. Yeah, so I was part of a group, and we were playing through the Savage Tide adventure path that Paizo was publishing in Dungeon Magazine at the time. And some of the folks that I was playing with had done freelancing for Dungeons and Dragons and Paizo, Dungeon and Dragon Magazine specifically, in the past. And so when Wizards was doing their closed playtest of 4th edition, some of them were able to get early copies of that. They were playing in a separate campaign that was a playtest campaign. But they sort of knew earlier than other folks that they definitely wanted to continue playing 3.5. So when Paizo announced that they would be doing the Pathfinder role-playing game, we watched it very closely because we had loved what Paizo had done thus far with the adventure paths. As a Dungeon subscriber myself, I converted my subscription over to the Pathfinder AP volumes when they first started coming out, and I largely put them on the shelf. I didn't. I wasn't really interested in that. I was already in a weekly campaign that we were maybe a third of the way through, maybe half the way through. I'm not sure what book exactly we were on. And so I wasn't interested in a second adventure path. I didn't have the bandwidth to do that. But I figured, well, I'm getting these books for free because I subscribed the month before they announced that the magazines were going away. I figured I would mine them in the future when I was doing some homebrew thing. I wanted to tell my own stories. Well, when Paizo announced the play test was going to start for the Pathfinder role-playing game, I went and I picked up those books and gave them a closer look, because I realized at that point that I was likely to be playing Pathfinder. And from there, I got involved in the organized play program. I played since episode one. Not episode one. Since the very first scenario.
Season one.
Yeah, no,
season zero.
Silent Tide.
Silent Tides.
Silent Tide. Yeah.
Scenario one. Yep.
Yeah, I did not make it to Gen Con that year, but a friend of mine who has since written a lot for Paizo and the Pathfinder Society, Alex Greenshields, he downloaded the book or the scenario on day one, and he ran it for at a game store in New York. Which is actually where I met him. Was, hey, someone's going to be running this in New York, and I went and played, and he ran that, and
awesome.
I became very active in Pathfinder Society. That folks in my Savage Tide campaign started to move away or get busy, and so that group sort of fizzled out. But the remnants of the group started playing Curse the Crimson Throne. No, not Council of Thieves. Sorry. I tried maybe 3 times to get a Rise of the Rune Lords game going, but I never really got. No, I guess one of the games we got to Zanisha. So we got through the first 2 books of Rise of the Rune Lords, and even to the beginning of. Did they make it to Turtleback Ferry? They did. Yeah, so they got into Fort Rannoch, and then. I feel like Lucretia gave him a really hard time, and that I know I didn't TPK them, but the group definitely didn't continue after that. So we got 2.5 books into
that's not bad.
Yeah.
Into Rise of the Rune Lords. I tried running it a second time, and we didn't finish the first book. And throughout this whole period, starting in about January or February of 2008, I was quickly becoming enamored with the Pathfinder setting, with the at the time was called the Pathfinder Chronicles campaign setting. And as someone who is often motivated by completionism, I'll say, the idea that here was a setting that was really deep and immersive, but that I could get in on the ground floor of, was really appealing. As much as I'm a fan of Star Trek and Star Wars and Doctor Who and you name it, I'm a fan. There's always a backlog of material.
You name it, we can name it, and you're a fan?
The chance you could give it a try. Yeah, if it's a nerd thing, I'm probably a fan of it.
What about I don't know, cat folk?
Sure. Yep, you named it. Okay. How'd you guess? So I had tried to get into the Forgotten Realms, but there was no way I was ever going to catch up. It had been going for 20 years at that point. Longer, 25 years. The Greyhawk had been going for even longer, and I liked a lot of the things about those settings, in large part because of the adventures that existed for them and the stories I was able to play or read set there. But I didn't have that same sense of being able to be the expert on them, or just being able to get caught up, so that I would have read everything. And
so were you the canon expert in your group?
Oh, always. Not about Greyhawk. No, when we were playing in Savage Tide, the GM and the host, the guy whose house we played at, they were the Greyhawk experts. Like they remembered playing, you know, white box D&D, in the 70s, and they had sort of Greyhawk was their setting that they grew up with, so they really knew that. One of the guys who played, he came in and out of the campaign, was Brian Cortijo, who has also written a lot for both Wizards and Paizo, and he's a Forgotten Realms canon expert. So I was playing with people who were canon experts, and I think that's part of why we got along, because we were all sort of the kind of people who fully immersed ourselves in these fantasy worlds. And for me, the world that I immersed myself in was Golarion, because that was one that I could read everything that was about Golarion, and I could know it as well or better than other people. And I didn't try and learn it to be the best, though if I do say so myself, I certainly was. I don't know if I am anymore, ironically, but I certainly had the free time. I lost my job during the recession and used a lot of that free time both to start freelancing for Paizo, but also just to read the hundreds of pages of material that were put out every month. And that's something that I don't have time for anymore, which is why I say I'm not quite as up on things as I used to be. But the largest venue that I used to learn the setting and help grow the Pathfinder community, because I wanted to see the game succeed, was to work on PathfinderWiki.com, where I was among the very first people to join the wiki, and have been an administrator on it for what is it now, 11 and a half years, and am one of the few that's been, other than the guy who still owns the domain, I'm the active member who's been there the longest. So that act of reading something, understanding it well enough to be able to write about it in your own words, the same way that you write a book report or a research paper in school as a way of learning a topic. I did that with all of the Pathfinder gods. I did that with all of the nations. I did that with the organizations. I did that with historical eras and magic items, and basically anything that had a canon aspect to it. I was trying to get onto the wiki. So that was really how I became the setting expert, and in so doing, caught the attention of the folks at Paizo, both on their message boards and then at Piezocone in 2009 was the first Piezocone I went to, and I became known as super fan Yoda ate my head, and so it was a few weeks before Piezocone 2009, and I was actually in the middle of my Council of Thieves game. We were getting ready to go into the Pathfinder Lodge there, and so we were in book 2. And I got a phone call, and I was like, I have no idea who this is. This was before robocalls, so I picked up. And it was Eric Mona, and he said, "Hey, Mark, how are you doing? Are you still looking for work?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, actually, I'm free." I guess he knew this because I don't even remember how. I guess because of the message boards or something. And he said, "Well, are you coming to Piezocone?" I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "How would you like to stay for an extra week and come into the office and help us with a project that we need someone with your expertise to help do?" And I basically turned to the rest of the players and I was like, "I'm going to work at Paizo for a week." uh, and they were all like, "That's great. Sit back down here. We're fighting a monster." Um, but Eric over the phone told the GM that I got a free reroll, so that was nice. And then, so I went to that Piezocone. We won the trivia contest that year, and then I got to stick around for a week afterward. No, that's not right. I have the years wrong. I guess I went to Piezocone in 2009, which was right, and it was shortly thereafter that I lost my job. So I guess that's how Eric knew. It was a year later. It was in 2010, because at that point, Council of Thieves had been out, and the APG was the big book that was coming out. So 2008 was my first Piezocone. 2009 was 2009 was first Piezocone. 2010 is when
that's when you put out that blog about staying after Piezocone for the week. And
they let me do a guest blog where I was basically like, "Oh my god, this is awesome." And at the end of that week, I didn't realize it at the time, but they were using that contract job as a test to see how I fit in with the office, how professional I was, or whether I was just like some crazy fan who knew a whole bunch but wasn't as professional as they would need for an employee. But that Friday afterward, when I was, it was my last day there, James Jacobs and Eric and Lisa and I all sat down, and they were just like, "Well, how do you think things have been going?" Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, they've been great." They said, "Well, how would you like to do this full time?" And it was certainly a surprise to me, and I had to get on the phone and call my then fiance, my wife, who was getting ready to go, or who was just finishing up grad school in New York, and say, "Hey, hon, what would you think of when you graduate moving to Seattle?" And she was like, "Are you serious?" But I had been out of work for a year. She was just finishing up grad school, didn't have a job lined up, so we said, "Yeah, let's give it a go. This is my dream job." So
living the dream.
Yeah, I started my 9-year anniversary is coming up in about 2 weeks. It was the very end of August. It was the weekend before Labor Day that I started, and like the Thursday or Friday before Labor Day. And I initially was working on Pathfinder Society under Josh Frost, who was managing the campaign. Then I was brought in to help him with development. He was replaced by Hiram Savage, who took up campaign management role, and then I was the sole person developing stuff.
And then the third one was Mad Eye Moody, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Defense against the Dark Exposition.
Exactly. Yeah, and I guess now we have Professor Umbridge.
Don't call her that.
Well,
Severus Snape, Harry Potter.
Okay. Well, I'm just going in order, right?
Okay.
No, it was. Let's see. Who was first? It was.
First it was Nick Logue. Was Quirrell.
Well, no. Nick Logue was originally supposed to be doing the development side of it.
Okay.
And Josh Frost was going to be doing the big picture campaign stuff, but Nick was unable to. He was offered his dream job, which I believe was teaching
theater in Hawaii,
at a university in Hawaii.
Yeah. And then
he's an expert in kabuki theater. Right. So that
And then Hiram.
Yeah. So.
And then you had to do it temporarily. You're the next one.
It's true.
You
yeah.
Just black
because,
that period out of your mind.
And then Mike Brock.
I have.
And then John had to do it temporarily.
Yeah.
And then Tanya.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when John came on in, I don't even know what year that would have been. It was while we were working on season.
John came in for season 4, partway through season.
right?
Right?
That was Season of the Demon.
No,
Was-
see,
wasn't he
John
there
was there for the midpoint of Year of the Risen Rune. His first full year was Season
That's
of the
right,
Demon.
Yeah.
because John's first scenario came out after he started working at Paizo.
That's right.
It was
Words of the Ancients, which he had written
Right.
before, came out after
Exactly.
he came
Exactly.
out. Yes.
So that is when he
There we
started.
go. The trivia.
So at that point, it was John and I was sort of training him on all the ins and outs of development and campaign management. But I was really feeling the burnout of doing that, in part because it was largely a one-man job then, and now there's 5 people on the team.
Well, there are more societies now than there were then.
That's
There
true.
are 3 societies and there are a few more people, but still doing it as one person is ridiculous.
But from day one, it was not a one-person job.
It was never a one-person job.
Which is in part why there was always so much turnover on the organizational side, because we were always so strapped for resources that it was like trying to get water from a stone. Like there was only so much that we could do. And so once John really knew what he was doing with it, I stepped back and started doing more development on the modules, which I had always from the beginning sort of been expected to do both PFS and modules, and that just was.
So are we now
crazy.
at are we at job number 2 that you've had?
Well, my job was developer the entire time. So while I was working on different product lines, I was in the same basic role. It was just a different product that I was responsible for.
Also, Kubets from the chat says we should move to HR because of the amount that we know about Paizo employees. I have to say that most of the time when people tell me their stories of how they got started, I didn't know a lot of factors. Mark Moreland's story is one that I happen to know because of that blog that they let him post, and just in general.
Yeah, because you two were both super fans. I remember my first Piezocone as an employee, meeting the two of you in the hallway at the.
It was the Sea Coast.
It was at the coast.
Bellevue, the Bellevue Coast Hotel before they moved it over.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I remember the two of you being so excited. Was that your first Piezocone?
That was our first Piezocone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You can definitely tell when it's someone's first Piezocone because they're just. Yeah, their eyes are wide like saucers, and you're just like, what? That's James Jacobs. That's.
There you go.
Jason Bowman, or whatever. And the two of you as Pathfinder Society people were excited to meet me. And I am happy to say that I have now cured you of that excitement.
There you
no
go.
longer get quite so wide-eyed when
I told you about
that would be really awkward because our desks are right across the cubicle from each other.
Right.
It's like, oh my gosh, it's Mark Moreland again.
What would you do if every time you come to work, I'm like, it's Mark Moreland? You'd make some.
Owen said this may have been the last time anyone was excited to meet Mark Moreland.
Mean. People have been excited to meet Moreland on plenty of occasions.
That's not true, but
I don't know.
I was excited.
I work very hard to be curmudgeonly enough that people are not excited to see me.
Even when you're being a curmudgeon, you're
I was excited to tell you about the epically terrible situation that my group put me in for Throaty Mermaid because I thought you would like it, and all of the Arcane Mark viewers know about it because I've mentioned it on a previous
yes, we definitely met him with let me tell you about our character.
Even before that, Mark, you and I started Pathfinder Society at about the same time. I was at Gen Con, but I didn't get to play Silent Tide because there were too many sold out, so I started with Hydra's Fang incident.
Okay.
And so I was seeing all of your posts on the message board as Yoda ate my head that were good answers when people were asking weird questions, and so and then using the Pathfinder wiki, so I sort of was seeing all the stuff you were doing even before you were at Paizo.
Yeah.
And
that's not always true for the other guests we have on the show that I didn't know what they were
Pathfinder
up to.
Wiki
I think that Adam and I were really Adam started a few months after me, and he and I were definitely people who were such staples on the message boards that there was this weird gray area for all of the other fans when we became employees, because people that we had just sort of friended on Facebook and hung out with at cons and things as fans who shared stuff, suddenly power dynamics the wrong word because it's not like game designers have any real power.
Power.
Yes, exactly. But the relationship changed because then they were asking things of me as an authority figure on Pathfinder Society or on whatever, and so it was really weird. I don't know if Adam experienced the same thing, but I certainly had. Unlike some folks who have come to Paizo through other RPG connections, people who worked at WotC previously or who, got their start in, working for other third-party publishers and then came to Paizo. There's a few of us who really did start as fans, and we weren't like secret fans that no one knew about.
Yeah.
We were very ever present, members of the community. And back then, the Paizo boards, while they still had their share of vitriol, especially around what the definition of penultimate was, or what a taurine was.
Well, what about paladin alignment threads?
Those are
I have avoided those since day one.
Okay.
You are a wise man.
I have played plenty of paladins who lived that argument with their group,
but
I have not engaged in those on purpose. It was a much smaller community back then because the number of people who were on there, the company just had a smaller reach. It was a magazine publisher, and it was just not quite the one of the industry's largest forums like it is now.
That's definitely true.
And so, yeah, I don't even remember how we got talking about this.
Oh, we were talking about
when I met you.
Yeah, when you met us,
right?
And
yeah.
when we sort of knew about what you were going to answer for this question more than other
people. But the two of you made an impression on me too. I don't remember what it was, but definitely, Mark, when you started working at Paizo, I was like, I remember him from Piezocone.
Well, you're one of the few people who remember us from that first Piezocone because even though I talked to Eric about the first time that I talked to him, which was at the end of that first Piezocone, he came to that table in the front of the Coast Hotel. He sat down at a table that I was just talking to two other random fans at that were just on the front, and he's
the table where Eva or whatever artists they had that year was signing and doing their stuff, right? Artist table.
It was just a random table that was at the front, right in front of checkout and the desk, and then Eric just sat down in the lobby at that random table that was there, and is like, I will now enter the sleep of ages. The Odin sleep, or something like that. He just said that to us. And so then, this came up because a few weeks ago, Eric said that again. I was like, Eric, that is the first thing you ever said to me. and he did not remember it.
And he was probably like, yeah, I'm still waiting for that Odin sleep to start. It's been 11 years and he's still waiting.
That's right. But let's see. So let's go back. We had a really long and vigorous sort of answer to the first question, and there have been a lot of things that people said in chat. So first of all,
I can't see the chat.
Don't worry about it. I'll tell you. So Brian says, I have my Samuel Tarly action figure here to watch the show because he got it from Question Mark's panel.
Oh,
remember?
yeah, okay, all right, good.
He brought his Samuel Tarly action figure, the only actual good prize from Question Mark's.
No, those bubbles were awesome.
Oh, okay, the bubbles were good. We should have given them to James.
What about the suspect fish plushie?
The suspect plushie, Kira almost tried to take it, but
then Tanya said that it was too suspect.
So, Alex said that your scruff evolved into a full beard, looking good.
Oh, it evolved into. I mean, there was a time when it was down to my middle of my chest, and my wife put an end to that.
Okay.
But thank you. It's going gray, but other than that, it's
yeah.
I'm proud of it.
Brian asked if it's possible for something to be officially not canon.
Yes.
Okay, that's a good answer. Kubets is wondering, as the franchise manager, what would you like to be seeing in 2 years for the franchise? Which is a very open-ended question.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is I know things that are likely to come out in 2 years.
So it's
that
giving away
Change it to
industry
5
knowledge.
years. As a franchise manager, what would you like to
Well,
see in 5 years?
what that you don't know about just seems like something cool that you would want to do.
I mean, I would love to see a Skyrim style video game.
Oh man, yeah.
I know that the Kingmaker has been great, and I love it, and I play it as much as I can, and I certainly played it a lot before it came out to make sure it was right.
You certainly did a huge amount of work looking through all of that text.
Oh yeah.
Watching you bleary-eyed with these reams of printed scripts, like how am I going to make it through these hundreds of
it was
pages
the stack.
of text?
It was the stack that was, 8 to 10 inches of paper
How did you
I had to read
do
through.
that? I don't even understand.
By skipping the ones that were just yes, no, and just going to the big blocks of text and trusting that the small ones were fine.
Okay.
And they have been, so
Yeah, an open world game sounds pretty cool.
As much as I like the Kingmaker game and I like that party aspect of it, there's just something about that solo, first person / third person, not really a shooter, but where you make your Pathfinder and then you go out exploring. I think that would be tons of fun. I would love to see skilled storytellers telling their own original stories in our world. That's one of the things I loved about the fiction, was that the Pathfinder Tales novels and the comics have not adapted existing adventures that I was already familiar with. And so I'd love to see that in a video game format, and
that's cool.
And that's something that unless there's an offer that I don't know about, that we don't currently have in the works, something like that.
Where else out there can you play an open world game where you can play a Leshy?
I'm sure it's somewhere. I mean, there's got to be one of those internet rules, which is if you can play a game, you can play a game as a blank.
As a Leshy?
Yes.
Okay.
There's going to be a cute mascot
so
character.
There were a series of questions that were that basically came down to Mark Moreland trivia knowledge, which I mostly answered that you were undefeated in the trivia contest. People wondered if a trivia showdown between you and James Jacobs. My answer was James would win because he would then, after answering what change the answer to be his answer, because he's the creative director of the setting and he has the power to do that. But then if you were limited to what was printed in books, I would give you good odds, just based on your ability with the trivia contest in the past.
Well, I think that depends largely on when it came out. After the first few years of working at Paizo, I really stopped being able to read everything. And as someone who's not working on it all the time, you can sit down with a 32-page adventure or player companion and read that in one sitting and basically absorb all the information from it. An adventure path takes longer, but when you're spending 40 plus hours a week, elbows deep in surgery on one specific book, you might know that book really well, but when you get home, at least for me, the joy of sitting down and cracking open an adventure path and seeing what's happening in Giant Slayer or Strange Eons or whatever is just, I don't have the energy for it, because it feels like work, which is one of the reasons they say don't ever work in one of your hobbies, because it ruins the hobby. And I wouldn't say that's true for me, but certainly that same level of just ability to immerse myself in stuff. So the longer I've worked there, it's ironic that the newer something is, I know about 6 months worth of stuff because I'm actively using them at the moment. Like, I know pretty well what's in the Lost Omens World Guide, for example, because I've been writing preview blogs and I've been coordinating with our licensees about that. But I don't really know that well what was in the Daruma book, because it came out and I've got it. In fact, I probably have it right here. No, I have.
Oh, okay.
I have the bunch we got after that, including this one that I wrote. Yay!
Woo!
Yeah.
Speaking of
my first AP volume. But anyway, I think that, so in the office when people have trivia questions, I tend to be able to answer the ones about, hey, have we ever said such and such? But if it's something that we've never said, or we've said conflicting things and we need a call on, well, now we have to decide, what color the flag of whatever new country, if we have to
Vidrian.
Exactly. While whoever wrote Vidrian or whoever worked on that book probably decided what color, it was probably Eleanor and Luis. If it's something like, what is the form of government in Nervacha? Well, we've certainly never said anywhere whether Nervacha is a democracy or a monarchy or an oligarchy or whatever. And if for some reason we needed to know what something was like in Nervacha, I can't answer that from a franchise management standpoint, because there's not yet it's not yet part of the franchise. That answer, it doesn't exist. So that's a question for James. He really does a lot more of the vision of sort of what the brand, not just what the brand, but what the world and what the stories will be. And I do a lot more of the, if we're doing an adventure set in Nervacha, then maybe we should make sure that there are spider people minis, and we should make sure that, that we nail down exactly how the nation is pronounced and get that to all of our audio partners and, whatever. So, and then that we're consistent with it in 5 years. So I think James, it would probably be tough, and depending on what the trivia questions were, I think James could rake me over the coals without having to invent anything new on the spot, which would be his prerogative.
Yep. So basically, James will win unless you really, really limit him down and pick the right questions.
Yes, and I report to James, so he would win because he's my boss.
There you go.
So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned briefly there writing. How did you get into writing for Paizo? Having published, being part of the published books, as opposed to of course you did plenty of writing as a fan for Pathfinder Wiki.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I got my start. I think that the wiki allowed me to show the people who were assigning work that I was capable of writing, that I could write complete sentences in English that made sense and were canonically accurate. It allowed me to get my foot in the door, certainly. So I got 3 assignments at about the same time. I reached out to Sean K. Reynolds, who was at the time assigning things for the player companion line. And he gave me a few sections, I would say maybe 2,000 words, 2,400 words of gnomes of Galarian. And I wrote some of the locations in that, some of the new gnome settlements. I wrote, I'd have to look at the book and tell you which sections I wrote. I was working on that at the same time that I was working on the Kingmaker Player's Guide. Which, so Wes was in charge of that at the time, and he gave me the section on like character backgrounds. He was like, hey, can you write a paragraph about how a dwarf or how an elf or a gnome or a ranger or druid or a monk might find themselves in the River Kingdoms or Southern Brevoy. I was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And then I submitted a pitch to Josh Frost for the open call. And at the time, the open call was, you need to do a scenario in such and such a nation that uses this monster.
Was Pallid Plague your pitch for the open call?
Yeah, Pallid Plague was the pitch. And Josh assigned that to me. So I really got three assignments all around the same time. The first to come out was Pallid Plague. And even before that came out, I was already working on Darkest Vengeance with Tim Hitchcock, who also lived in New York. And so he and I worked together pretty well, both as freelancers as well as when I was assigning work. He did a lot of work for me when I was doing PFS. So that's how I got my start, was basically, by making it so that Sean and Wes and Josh knew who I was. I volunteered at Piezocone and Gen Con to run scenarios when I was there, so that Josh knew me. I organized events in my local area, again, so Josh knew me. If anyone from New York went to play anywhere, they knew me, and I really knew what was going on with the pulse of scenarios there. I wasn't in charge of the New York Google group or whatever we used, but I certainly ran a bunch of games and was very active in that. And so between getting to know the people making the game and giving them the opportunity to put a face with my name, being a helpful member of the community and a contributor on the wiki were what I think did it. And then playing by the rules and just entering the open call and hoping that it worked out.
That makes sense. Mm-hmm. So Owen has a question. He wants us to ask you about the first project he ever wrote for you.
Oh, Owen Stevens.
Yeah, that's who the Owen is who said that was probably the last time anyone was excited to beat Moreland. He was kidding.
Well, certainly the first time I met Owen was after that project, and I was nervous to meet Owen because I was afraid he was going to hate me, and I think he just hit it very well for all these years.
He wants to ask about that first project he wrote for you.
Yeah, Penumbral Accords. So that was originally supposed to be a completely different scenario. My cat is freaking out.
Oh, by the way, Owen says, "Lol, I'm a big fan of Moreland." In case anyone on the chat or watching this video at home thinks that Moreland was not joking about that hidden hatred.
Yeah, no, I
or else he's just still hiding it here in the chat.
I know. I mean, if there's one thing Owen does, he commits to a part. So that was supposed to be a completely different scenario. I feel like that was supposed to be part 3 of the Eyes of the Ten arc.
Oh, wow.
And we've been getting a lot of complaints from people that we were releasing too much high-level content and not enough first-level adventures around that time. And we looked at the reporting data and realized that fewer than 100 people had played Eyes of the Ten, much less the first 2. I wrote the second one. And so it was clear from both the reporting data and the message we were getting from the fans that releasing and putting in all of the development work on a 12th level adventure that was part of a 4-part series, just that would have been a huge resource sink at the wrong time. And so we realized very late, probably within 6 weeks of when that scenario needed to come out, that we needed something else. And we didn't have the time to
thanks for the cheer, GM Reckless.
We didn't have the time to order a new map or art for it. We needed to give it to someone that we knew could turn something over that would be a quick development, because we were already so far behind schedule on this new scenario.
Owen said 4 weeks.
Maybe he had 4 weeks.
Oh, you had 2 weeks to outline it and get it to Owen.
Gotcha.
Something like that. Yeah, it was still very short. I mean, maybe it was 4 weeks total. Sure. Either way, it was not a long time. And so Hiram, who was who was managing the campaign at the time, said Owen Stevens can do it, and Owen had written Guide to Absalom by this point. I mean, he had done stuff for Paizo that I had read, and I'd never worked with him. But I was like, hey, if you say he can do it, I trust you. You're in charge of the campaign. You say we do it, we do it. So instead of ordering a map, we were able to sort of sweeten the deal for Owen of writing this thing in like a weekend or 2 weeks or however long he had to do it. By saying, what we would have paid a cartographer, we will pay you. But the stipulation then was that he had to use a map that we already had. And at the time, we weren't using flip mats or map packs as the maps in scenarios. So we were like, what map are we going to use? And, with a year's worth of scenarios, 2 years worth of scenarios under our belt, I looked back at what we had, and people loved the Black Rose Museum. That Miss Mwangi was far and away the most popular of the scenarios that was out there. And so I said, can you do another adventure set in the museum?
So was
And
that
we'll
really
just-
the genesis for the Black Rose
Well,
Museum
wait,
becoming
hold on.
a big
Didn't
thing?
Voice in the
Yeah.
Void come out before Penumbral Accord too? What was the order of that? I thought Voice in the Void. Let me check.
Voice in the Void may have come out before.
Voice
I'm
in
on
the
the
Void
wiki
was October 2009, according to the wiki, by Rob, and was 35. Yeah, Penumbral Accord was season
Right.
2. I
Okay.
thought so.
Okay, yeah, you're right. So
Because one
so
of
Voice in the
the
Void-
projects I did was an early flow chart of like the arcs in Pathfinder Society that I put up online. And like I know you asked me, can I take this for the wiki? It was when I was a fan, and I had just figured out what all the connected arcs were. So that was one that I thought Voice in the Void was before Penumbral.
Yeah. So we had already done a scenario going back to the museum, but it used a new map. I mean, it took place in the basement
Yeah,
level.
Voice was in the basement.
Right. And so with Penumbral Accords, I basically said, we can go back to this location we've already been to. We've got this map. It's a museum. Museums change their collection all the time. Can you figure out a way to make that work? And I don't remember whether it was Owen's idea to use Shadow Absalom or whether that was something we came up with and just told him to run with that.
Well,
but
if he tells me, I'll let you know. He says
Yeah.
it's fascinating to hear the other side of this project.
Oh, yeah, he may not have known at the time all of this
Hey,
stuff that was
Steve,
going on.
welcome.
Yeah, and so either way, the fact that Owen had written Guide to Absalom, which had a section on Shadow Absalom in it, I think made him a good fit to do that and to introduce the Onyx Alliance and sort of set what then became sort of a pillar of the Black Rose storyline or ongoing meta plot, if you will, in motion. I mean, that came back in Black Rose Matrimony, that came back in Cairn of Shadows, I believe.
It became like one of Thirsty's favorite subplots, and so it's become back over and over.
Yeah, along with
of Absalom, etc.,
Yes.
all over the
yeah,
place.
yeah. It's that's become like one of the major through lines across the different seasons.
Yep.
Along with sort of the Rouseros, the Overwatched mystery of the building that they used for the museum. But between those two, those pretty much were the Black Rose backstory for a lot. And so Owen turned the adventure over, and I developed it super fast, and that's it. So
that's it. Oh man, that was not.
That's the story.
That's not what Owen said. He said, ask Moreland about the first project I ever wrote for him, which I did, and then he said he wasn't sure he'd ever hire me again.
Well, because we had given him so little time and so little guidance that it ended up not being what I had thought it was going to be.
Look how professional Mark was, though. When I didn't prompt that, he didn't say anything about
hey,
that.
hey, I only throw certain people under the bus, and Owen's not one of them.
Well, you guys were office mates for a while, so there must be some
we
kind
were
of
cube
rapport.
mates. Yeah. No, I mean, by the time Owen started working at Paizo, that was within my first year of working at Paizo that this happened. This was, when did that come out? Penumbral Accords came out in December 2010. So I'd been at Paizo for 4 months. This was, I think, the first month that I was fully in charge of development and planning on the campaign. Prior to that, let's see, Fury of the Fiend.
So that was the second Fiend one. Fingerprints, then
Yeah.
Fury.
Yeah.
And I'm looking back at what came out that season and which ones I developed and which ones the first scenario I developed. Now we're getting way off target here. Was
that's okay. Whatever you want to talk about. That's what these interviews are for.
So we have an emoji specifically for going off.
Yeah,
the
you're right.
topic.
It's a squirrel.
Okay.
Because it's
I'm
such
just gonna
an
play the
integral part of
emoji.
our stream.
We always do this, so keep going. What's the first one that you developed?
First one I developed, I think. So all of the Gen Con scenarios came out before I started, and Red Revolution was one that Josh.
And that was
developed.
The actual part 3 of Eyes of the Ten.
Right. Then it was part 4 that was supposed to be Penumbral Accords.
Oh, okay.
That we pushed back. Yeah. So you're right. Red Revolution was here,
Yeah,
and I don't remember whether I developed Red Revolution because Josh couldn't develop his own scenario, or I know that I developed First Heresy was the first scenario that arc. I know I did, and in retrospect, I made a lot of development errors. Not that I got numbers wrong, but there was a lot about adventure design and adventure presentation that I didn't know yet back then, that if I go back and look at those, I recognize how little I knew. So, I mean, it had been there. Owen's scenario was like the 6th scenario that I developed and was one of the first few that I assigned. It may have been the first one I assigned because the fact that there was already a part 4 of Eyes of the Ten was in that slot meant that we probably had months after that already. So let me look here and see the. Let's see. Penumbral Accords, Below the Silver Tarn. Yeah. Murder on the Chasma Screams. Those were all assigned. While I think the first one that I assigned after that, after Penumbral Accords, was The Flesh Collector, written by.
Yeah.
Who did write that one?
Who wrote
Flesh
Collector?
Collector? Martin Long. I thought that it was
Flesh Collector
wrong.
was a real dark horse of a scenario because I think it's good, but it had really low ratings on Paizo.com. So for a while, our group didn't run it, and then we ran it. It's like, why are the ratings low? It's a good scenario.
Because people died in it, I guess. I don't know.
It's not even that deadly. I think it just may have had very few ratings. So
Yeah,
here's another question. What is the Paizo book you've read the most?
Read the most because I worked on it and had to read it over and over and over again, or
I don't
read the
know.
most?
They've left it open-ended. What is the one you've read the most?
Certainly the one that I have referenced most often is probably the Inner Sea World Guide.
That makes sense, honestly. And then there's another one.
But reading from cover to cover, I very rarely do that with anything but novels, and I don't think I have read any of the novels more than once. I would probably say that it was later compiled into a novella, digitally, but the Compass Stone, the Eando Klein Pathfinder journals. I actually, when I was living in New York, because I didn't have a car, because who has a car in New York? and was commuting on public transit, I wanted to read this fiction, which at the time was the only fiction that existed for Pathfinder.
Right.
But I didn't want to carry my AP books with me to and from work. They just weren't convenient enough. They weren't convenient to read on a subway or on a bus, and and I wanted them to stay in good condition, so I didn't want them in my backpack anyway. So I copied all the text from those first 18 volumes and put it in a Word doc, and put that Word doc up as a private document that I printed using lulu.com.
Mm-hmm.
I made my own little trade paperback of those stories. Didn't sell them to anyone. I just whatever the copyright law is that lets you change the format of a thing you've bought.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's part of fair use.
There's a specific term for it that I should probably know as a franchise manager, but that I don't. But I basically was like, I want to be able to read these, and this is the way I can do that.
Sure.
So I paid the extra $20 or whatever it cost to make my single copy of this book that I read on the subway. So I read it first. I read it volume by volume when they came out over the first 3 APs. And then I read it again as I edited and formatted the text in that Word document. And then once I got the book, I read it on the subway.
Didn't you bring it to Piezocone to be signed?
I did.
And really impress everyone that you had made your own printed out version?
Yeah. That was yet another one of those. Make sure everyone knows who I am.
Strategy. All right. There's a follow-up about your most read book, which is, what are your top 3 most interesting Paizo lore books over the years?
Well, the ones I wrote, of course.
Owen says format shifting is the copyright term.
Okay, thank you, Owen.
Anyway.
I knew he would know.
But you've written more than 3 books, Moreland, so that's still...
Yeah. There's a lot more than 3. There's Taldor and all the ones you've already said.
The ones that I wrote that I didn't get credit for because I rewrote them.
That's right. That's a typical thing in Paizo.
Yeah, I mean, that's just part of development, is if you get something and that's not what you want, your job is to rewrite it and not get credit for it because you get a paycheck for it instead.
Unless you have to rewrite it so much that you get an end.
Yep. That rarely happens.
Yeah, we try not to do that because it can embarrass people. What are we talking, just source books or just books in general?
Books for lore, it says. So
books for lore.
Any 3. What are your top 3 lore books? I would assume that's for Pathfinder.
Yeah, I mean, that's like picking your children. Like, even the ones I didn't work on, there's so many that are just so full of stuff.
Okay,
that...
but you have a list of people you would push under the bus that Owen's not on. By the way, Owen said, "Aw,
yeah,
thanks,
but I wouldn't push my
for...
children under the bus."
So, you brought up that's a Starfinder AP. So you did a Starfinder AP?
Yeah, it's actually the first adventure path that I've written. It's the first non-Pathfinder Society adventure that I've written. I did Solar Strike, which came out last month. And it's probably backwards on everyone's screen, isn't it?
No, it's actually forwards.
Oh, okay. It's showing backwards for me, but that's because it mirrors this. So, in any case,
right.
It's the 5th part of the Dawn of Flame adventure path, that's it was quite an adventure. I had developed 64-page books before, but I had never written the bulk of one. I mean, that's not true. I wrote all but the monsters for Taldor, and I wrote a big chunk of the Cheliax book. So I'd done large projects before, but never an adventure that large, and it was certainly a learning experience. Even 9 years into the job.
Oh yeah, I mean, Linda did her first AP recently too.
I mean, the difference between writing a 20,000 word scenario with pre-gens in the back and writing a 45,000 word AP plus back matter is certainly pretty intense.
And the for a scenario too, so much of your word count is written up is used up by some of the trappings of the format of the, you have twice as many stat blocks in there, but you're really only designing 4 or 5 encounters.
Yeah.
And a lot of the word count is used up by explaining stuff about factions and things like that,
Right.
that are necessary for an organized play adventure, but that
Not as much anymore for factions.
sure,
But,
sure, they
yeah,
certainly.
but still.
I mean, the last scenario I wrote was probably season 3, maybe season 2. Once I started assigning them,
Throaty Mermaid you had, and then you all which was that was season 2.
That was season 2. Throaty Mermaid came out in like January,
Right.
and I don't think I wrote any scenarios after that.
I don't recall any others you wrote after that, but that certainly doesn't mean you did.
Yeah.
I feel like I would remember. I mean, but again, it was like I was the only one developing adventures, so for PFS. So if I had written one, it would have been, it would have put a burden on another team,
right?
Who was already, overtaxed getting their own work done, to develop that, or it would be published without development, which we try not to do. It's you always want someone to look at it and see. And it looks like I'm looking here by date of what I published. Throaty Mermaid.
Are you consulting Pathfinder Wiki?
I am, because I can't.
It's
I
so
can't
meta.
remember everything.
So the king of Pathfinder Wiki uses Pathfinder Wiki to learn about what he himself
yeah,
previously did.
Throaty Mermaid was the last thing that the last.
So it looks like the
I wrote.
collective Mark Breen Trust was accurate here.
Yes. But you've also done, I mean, you have the AP for Starfinder, and even though, of course you came in through Pathfinder because that's what was there at the time, you do things for Starfinder as well. You do stuff for Starfinder Wiki?
I do some. At this point, my, job at Paizo keeps me busy enough that I don't really do as much on either wiki as I would like or used to in the past. So at this point, I'm more of an administrator. I do little edits here and there, but not the big, here's a 2,000 word article about so and so god or such and such nation. I just don't have the time for that anymore. So while I'm involved in the Starfinder wiki, it's a much smaller wiki. There are fewer people working on it. There's just less information about Starfinder because it's a newer game.
And there's a gap.
There is a gap. Yes, that's true. There's not their AP volumes are smaller. They just have fewer product lines that are being released. So there's not as much of that drinking from the fire hose experience as there is with Pathfinder,
right?
Which I know motivated me to work on the wiki early on, because otherwise it just seemed so intimidating even to me who had all the books that I needed to organize the information for myself.
That makes sense.
And that's less of a case, I think, with Starfinder, because there really is just the one setting book. There's the Pact Worlds. There's just the APs are a little bit more self-contained because there's no guide to Corvosa that you need to read alongside the Curse of the Crimson Throne in order to be able to run those campaigns. So yeah, I mean, not to say that there isn't still a need for the wiki. I think Starfinder's in a better place than Pathfinder was when it launched in terms of information presentation and consolidation.
That makes sense. All right. We've gotten through all of the fans' questions and also our main questions.
And we've also taken you about 12 minutes past the hour already.
But we also, we started a couple minutes after the hour, but really we started okay. So it seems pretty good.
Unless there's anything else you'd like to
Mark,
talk about?
is there something that we didn't talk about that you'd like to talk about? Any franchise or licensed things that you think, not like new stuff people haven't heard of?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the place to make an announcement.
Yeah, not an announcement place.
But things that have already been announced that you think people should go check out that I can link?
I think the things that I'm most excited about that I've worked on directly that are coming out soon. The Legendary Adventures set of Pathfinder Battles miniatures comes out next month.
Have you guys seen that preview? Those previews Mark has been putting up for those, and the Goblin Village.
Check out the Paizo blog to see some of those.
I think it's like weirdly in the third party sub forum, but it's also
if you just go to the blog. If you just go to the wiki if you just go to the blog, the Paizo blog, and you look at like, you know, the day by day view, there are the last few Monday blogs have been.
I think I should be able to link it.
Yeah,
here's It Takes a Village. I can link that.
So we've got the Goblin Village premium set that's coming out, and I think it looks great. I'm really excited for that, more than I have been for any of our other set dressing or terrain sets, and that's coming off the heels of the Graveyard, the Cemetery of the Fallen, which I thought
that is so cool.
was amazing.
Linda hadn't seen the picture from your preview blog, and now that she's seen it, she's mesmerized.
Yeah. So, you know, the Goblin set has goblin babies in it so that you can present your moral quandary to...
I thought you said you avoided those paladin discussions. You're just creating them.
No. I play the paladin. I avoid the discussion and then play the paladin. But I would never play a kind of paladin who would murder children of any kind. So but we've got those. We've got a magic pig that comes from the comics. We've got a number of different callbacks to past Goblin products in there, so you can use that either as the setting of a big battle if you're fighting goblins who aren't good, or it can be a place where maybe your goblin character, now that second edition is out, is from, and you return there, or it's your base of operations if your whole party are goblins or whatever. So that set I think is really cool. So I'm excited about that. The minis are also, it's the first set since Rise of the Rune Lords to have randomized huge figures.
Oh yeah.
Ever since the Rise of the Rune Lords set back in 2011, 2012, we've any huges have just been premium figures that you buy a 2-pack of.
Right.
And so this one has the Algolthu, which is our name for the Aboleth. It's got dragon turtles. It's got quite a few of the like big Pathfinder and D&D staple monsters appearing in miniature form for the first time. So I'm excited about that.
And the preview pack is out for some people. Elftro said they found the preview pack and they love the new Hobgoblin in it.
Yeah, you should be able to find the preview pack. Almost all of the figures that aren't based on first edition art, and there are a few of them in the set, the most of the art, especially from the preview pack, came from Wayne Reynolds' concept art that we brought him into the office 3 or 4 years ago when we were first starting work on second edition, and said, "Hey Wayne, for the next month, we're just going to put you in this room here on this side of the building, and we want you to draw us what a second edition elf looks like." And he did these, like Vitruvian Man style drawings of what all the different races were going to look like that we could then send to our other artists and get a little bit more
there's
of
a cat in the background.
Yeah, that's Zoe. She is very vocal, and I think it's about time for her dessert. So she gets dinner at 6, and then she gets another scoop of food later because she demands it. So that's her dessert. I'm going to be a great uncle someday of giving too much food to children who ask for it when they shouldn't have it. What was I saying about the minis? Oh yeah, so we used a lot of these Wayne sketches to do the figures, which is why the hobgoblins and the bugbears all look a little bit different. But all of the figures in the preview set are from Wayne sketches. So if you like Wayne Reynolds' art, you like that distinctive Pathfinder look, we really wanted to capture that in this first set to come out since second edition launched at the beginning of the month. And so that's probably the product coming out soon. I'm most excited about.
Check out Legendary.
And if you're a fan of our fiction, I've sort of spearheaded this effort to get web fiction back. I think that it's good for the brand for us to have examples of the types of stories that you can tell with our world and with our game. And that's ultimately what these games are all about, is telling stories. And the number of people who have been brought into the hobby by reading a Drizzt novel, or by a Dragonlance novel, or a Pathfinder Tales novel for that matter, is huge. And so I think that giving people those examples to hook them of like, whoa, that cleric of so and so, that cleric of Desna was super cool. I want to tell a story about my own cleric of Desna. That's something that I've been working on very hard. So we've
the
had
chat
new.
is full of people who are very happy, sometimes in all caps, about that. And Steve Gatsu says can't read digital fiction, but glad it exists.
Yeah, I have just been copy again, like I did with that
With the Endo Klein?
with
Just
the
print
Endo
it out?
Klein. I just print it out, and I have myself a little folder here at home that if I get the hankering to read some Pathfinder fiction and I don't have the time for a full novel, which I can listen to on audiobook now, so I tend to have more time for that. Is that I can just pull that folder out and read it like I would read, anything else printed out on. I guess for Steve it would be A4 paper, but just on regular printer paper. If the screen bothers me, so I encourage you to give that a try if you can, Steve. As someone who's a fan of the novels. As a reader, I've really enjoyed being able to sort of revitalize those. And we don't yet have a business model or a partner to release them as a commercial enterprise. But as long as I can keep getting, the marketing team to pay for them on the blog, I'm going to keep doing that. So, we've got more coming. We have the first Starfinder fiction ever that's debuting now. James Sutter has written.
There was at least one episode that's already up.
One went up today, yeah. So there's a short story about Altronus.
One, right?
Altronus went up last week, and this week was Isef.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
So and next week we'll have whoever's next alphabetically, which I think is Keskadai.
Isef, I think Sutter wrote the Meet the Iconic originally, also. So I'm sure he had a lot of ideas about Isef.
Yeah, and Sutter is a great writer. His novels are two of my favorite Pathfinder tales, and so his knowledge of the game and having been the steward of Pathfinder tales while it was a thing, made him the obvious candidate to write those. And I think
never underestimate Sutter in any category.
Those are the two things that I've been most excited about recently as franchise manager. Trying to give that shot of adrenaline to our fiction, and the next set of minis coming out.
So
and I'm already working on the next set of minis after that, and the next set of minis after that, I've already got that full set list together, and we're going to get that in the works. We've got Starfinder minis coming out from two different partners in the near future. Arcane and WizKids both have stuff in the works. So it's a good time to like the Pathfinder and Starfinder franchises.
So minis and flash fiction, it looks like or a lot of people said they already have seen and love the fiction. So, and they really liked how the mechanics were blended into the to those fictions for the PF2 reveals. Yeah, that was one where
iconic encounters.
Yeah, the iconic encounters. Moreland came over to the design. And it's like, what would be a good thing to put in here to tell Sutter to put in, and we would discuss it, and he would find the best thing to put, and then go back and
I found the images. I think I started with the images for each one and said, well, this way we can preview all of these new pieces of art that we have for the book.
Right.
Let's base a story off each one, and then so I brought the picture to the design team, usually to you, Mark. Or Logan, and would say, okay, so here's the picture I'm using for Sione. It's her casting magic missile. What's a cool new mechanic or a new core thing to the sorcerer?
Right, and
or
I would
the magic
say,
missile that we want to make sure we show off. Yeah.
For her bloodline, she would have blood magic, so she would get a skill bonus when she casts magic missile.
Right. Exactly.
And
that's exactly what I told Sutter, and he put in the little thing about how as she cast the spell, she could feel the knowledge of her ancestors.
Right.
And that.
And I guess speaking of finding the art, a fact that some people may not know about you, that Moreland has been like one of the vocal advocates for getting lots of cool art up on the blog and available for people to use since it's on the blog just forever.
Yeah, once it's on the blog, it becomes legal for people to use in their own fan works, like Pathfinder Wiki, or like, if someone wants to write fan fiction and publish that, or make signs and posters to put up at their local convention or game store. Once it's on the wiki, or once it's on the blog, it's part of the community use package.
Ah, the wiki can use it. This explains why you've always been.
Yeah, it's all self-serving. But if the wiki can use it, then other people in the community can use it. And so that's always sort of my goal is, are we putting stuff up that the community can use going forward for their own wants and needs? If we're putting something up and it only serves Paizo for us to show this art, then it's only half there. We make a game for other people to play. And I think that that's true of the art as well. The art should serve everyone, and so I always want to get the best quality, most useful art up on the blog so that people can use those legally on their own fan sites or fanzines or whatever it is that they happen to do.
Makes sense. And people ask for an art book, so I linked them to Visions of War.
Yeah, Visions of War is our art book.
For some reason, I thought it was named Art of War for a second. That would have been a funny name too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it might have been at one point, but I think we're worried that people would confuse it with a very famous other book called Art of War.
Yeah.
Well, as Sun Tzu would say, misdirection is a very effective means to achieve your goals.
Unfortunately, I don't want the kind of people reading Sun Tzu to be mad at me for having misdirected them into buying an art book when they really Sun Tzu. Those are not the kind of people I want as my enemies. So.
Yeah. Or your friends, actually, because it says that you should betray them if you get an advantage. Mm-hmm. All right, fair enough. All right, well, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Have a great night.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll see you guys at the office tomorrow.
All right. So we'll say bye to YouTube and Twitch and end the stream. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.